What if the reason you feel mentally tired, the reason clarity feels so hard to hold on to, isn't because of your thoughts at all? What if you've been trying to fix your mind while standing in an environment that quietly pulls you back into the same patterns every day? Most people believe change begins inside them. But in scripture and in neuroscience, change often begins with where you are, not just what you think. In the next few minutes, you'll see why your environment shapes your thinking more than you realize, and why peace often starts around you before it ever shows up within you. You might feel like you're constantly fighting an uphill battle. Perhaps you wake up with a sense of heaviness that you can't quite name. You try to be positive, you try to have faith, yet there's a persistent fog, a spiritual dryness, or a feeling of being stuck in the same emotional loops year after year. It's easy to look inward and conclude that you are the problem, that you lack discipline, that your faith is weak, or that your mind is simply broken. But I want to offer you a different perspective today. This struggle is not a personal failure. You are not failing to grow. You may simply be trying to grow in a climate that wasn't designed for your flourishing. Most people never notice this. They look at their thoughts as if they exist in a vacuum, independent of the world around them. But there is a silent, constant influence working on you every second of the day. This influence is so subtle that it bypasses your conscious mind entirely. In a few minutes, you'll see why your surroundings are actually the silent narrator of your life story, and why changing the where is often the only way to finally change the who. Think of a seed. If you hold a high-quality seed in your hand, it contains all the potential for life. It has the DNA of a towering tree or a fruitful vine. But as long as that seed sits on a marble countertop, nothing happens. It isn't the seed's fault that it isn't growing. The seed isn't broken or lazy. It is simply waiting for the right soil. Our minds are much the same. We often blame ourselves for a lack of fruit, when the reality is that the soil we are planted in, the physical rooms we inhabit, the emotional climate of our homes, the digital spaces we frequent, is simply too thin or too toxic to support the life we want to lead. Our spaces have a way of whispering to our souls. Long before we form a thought, our surroundings have already begun a conversation with our nervous system. This is a language without words, a silent dialogue between the world outside and the world within. Think of the last time you walked into a hospital. Even if you weren't there for a personal emergency, you likely felt a subtle shifting in your chest. The sterile, white light, the specific scent of antiseptic, the rhythmic beeping of monitors, all of it sends a signal to your body. Without a single word being spoken, your body tenses. Your breathing might become slightly more shallow. Your brain is reading the threat level of the environment, and it is preparing you to be on guard. In contrast, think of the heavy, hallowed silence of an old library. The moment you cross the threshold, your voice instinctively lowers. Your footsteps become softer. The rows of books, the scent of aged paper, and the soft, warm lighting create a container of reverence. You don't have to tell yourself to be quiet. The environment demands it of you. It invites a different part of your brain to the surface, a part that is patient, reflective, and focused. But what happens when the spaces we inhabit most frequently are not designed for reverence or healing? When you sit in a room filled with clutter, unfinished tasks, and the physical reminders of past failures, your brain registers a to-do list that never truly ends. You aren't consciously thinking these things, but your nervous system is constantly scanning the horizon. It sees the stack of mail on the counter and registers a tiny spike of cortisol. It sees the laundry in the corner and registers a sense of not being enough. This is the climate of your life. Just as the climate of a region, the temperature, the rainfall, the wind, determines what kind of plants can survive there, the climate of your environment determines what kind of thoughts can survive in your head. In a desert, only the hardiest, most defensive plants can grow. They must have thorns to protect their water. They must be tough to survive the heat. If you live in a climate of constant urgency, noise, and visual chaos, your thoughts will mirror that desert. They will become defensive, sharp, and focused purely on survival. In such an environment, peace will always feel like a stranger, a traveler who passes through but never find a place to stay. You cannot force a tropical flower to grow in a frozen tundra, no matter how much you think about it or how much willpower you exert. You must change the climate. We are designed to adapt. This is one of the most beautiful and, at times, most difficult aspects of being human. We are biological chameleons. Our brains are incredibly efficient at scanning our surroundings to determine what is normal for this specific time and place. This is an ancient survival mechanism. In the wild, if your tribe was anxious, it was because there was a predator nearby. To survive, you had to mirror that anxiety instantly. You didn't have time to ask why. You simply had to adapt to the emotional frequency of the group. Today, we are still doing this, but the predators have changed. If you spend your days in an environment where people are constantly anxious, cynical, or hurried, your brain accepts this as the baseline for reality. It begins to mirror the frequency of its surroundings. You don't realize you're becoming more anxious. You simply feel like you're fitting in to the world as it is presented to you. You begin to believe that life is inherently frantic, that people are naturally untrustworthy, and that peace is a luxury for those who don't have real responsibilities. Your brain prioritizes safety and familiarity over transformation. It would rather keep you in a familiar state of stress than lead you into an unfamiliar state of peace. If the environment feels unsafe or chaotic, whether that's due to physical clutter, emotional volatility in a relationship, or the constant noise of a digital world, your brain will keep you in a state of high alert. This is the survival brain in action. And when the survival brain is leading, it is nearly impossible to access the deeper, reflective parts of your spirit. You cannot hear the still small voice when your internal alarm system is screaming about the mess on the kitchen table or the tension in the office. This is a truth that resonates throughout the pages of Scripture from the very first breath of humanity. We see that God is deeply concerned with placement. When He created man, He didn't just create a soul and leave it in a void. He didn't just give Adam a set of instructions. He created a garden. He understood that for a human to be whole, they needed a specific kind of environment, one of order, beauty, and presence. The Garden of Eden was not just a luxury. It was a functional necessity for the human spirit to remain in communion with the divine. It was a place where the climate was perfectly tuned to the frequency of peace. Throughout the Bible, we see this recurring theme: be careful what you walk among. There's a recognition that we are porous creatures. We are not solid, impenetrable blocks. We are more like sponges. We absorb the world around us. We absorb the tension in a room, the values of a city, and the spiritual atmosphere of our homes. The wisdom of the ancients understood that who you become is largely a function of where you stay. Think of the Israelites in the wilderness. They had been in Egypt for 400 years. Egypt was an environment of bricks and mortar, of constant labor, of being defined by what you could produce. It was a climate of scarcity and oppression. When God took them out, He didn't take them directly to the promised land. He took them to the wilderness. Why? Because their physical environment needed to match the inner work God was doing. The wilderness was a place of stripping away. It was a place where there were no bricks to make, no pharaohs to please, and no city walls to hide behind. It was a place where the environment forced them to look up instead of looking at their work. They had to leave the physical location of their bondage before they could ever hope to leave the mental state of a slave. The climate of the desert was necessary to kill off the thinking of the plantation. Even Jesus, the most mentally and spiritually clear person to ever walk the earth, practiced the art of withdrawal. We often think of His retreats as simple breaks from work, but they were much more than that. He frequently left the crowds, the noise, and the demands of the city to go to the mountains or the desolate places. He wasn't just getting away from people. He was returning to an environment that aligned with His Father's voice. He knew that the noise of the city creates a specific kind of mental static. He knew that the expectations of the crowd create a climate of performance. By moving His physical body to a place of natural order and silence, He allowed His human nervous system to reset. He knew that even the Son of Man needed a space that supported clarity rather than one that demanded output. In neuroscience, this is called neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to reorganize itself by forming new neural connections throughout life. Our brains are not static. They're constantly being resculpted. But what often goes unsaid is that neuroplasticity is heavily dictated by your environment. Your brain is essentially a map of where you have been. It builds roads or neural pathways based on the terrain it inhabits. Every time you enter a familiar space, your brain triggers the neural pathways associated with that space. This is why you can feel like a completely different person when you go back to your childhood home. The physical triggers, the smell of the hallway, the height of the ceilings, activate old maps in your brain. This happens in your daily life too. If you always argue with your spouse in the kitchen, the moment you walk into the kitchen and see the light hitting the counter, your brain prepares for a fight. It releases a small amount of adrenaline. It sharpens your tone. Your brain is trying to be helpful by preparing you for what it thinks is about to happen. If you always feel inadequate or overwhelmed at your workplace, the physical building itself, the gray cubicles, the hum of the fluorescent lights, the sound of the elevator, can trigger a stress response before you even sit at your desk or open your first email. You are fighting a battle against your own biology because your brain has mapped that environment to a state of threat. Your brain is rewiring itself based on repeated exposure. It is a slow, quiet process like water shaping stone. A single drop of water doesn't change the rock, but 10,000 drops over 10 years will carve a canyon. Your environment is that water. The clutter of a messy room, the noise of a toxic relationship, the static of a constant digital feed. These are the drops that carve the canyons of your thinking. When you are in a calm, orderly, and intentional environment, your brain undergoes a profound shift. It lowers its defensive responses. When the signals coming in through your eyes and ears tell your brain that you are safe, it moves out of the survival centers like the amygdala, the part of the brain that sees every problem as a predator. It allows the prefrontal cortex, the area responsible for wisdom, empathy, and complex thinking, to take the lead. This is why you often have your best ideas in the shower, or while walking through a park, or in that one quiet chair in the corner of the room that you only use for reflection. It's not a coincidence, and it's not just relaxation. It's because your environment finally gave your brain permission to stop defending and start creating. When the threat of the environment is removed, the brain naturally shifts into a state of growth. It begins to make connections it couldn't make when it was busy scanning for danger. We often forget that the peace of God that surpasses understanding often requires a place of God that supports our understanding. We are physical beings as much as we are spiritual beings. Our souls are housed in a body that is hardwired to respond to the world. If we want to transform our minds, we must look at the soil in which those minds are planted. Think about the places where you spend the most time. Are they telling you that you are a child of God, loved and at peace? Or are they telling you that you are a worker who is behind on their tasks? Are they telling you that the world is a place of beauty and order, or a place of chaos and competition? You cannot think peacefully in a space that screams war. The invitation is to stop trying to think your way out of a toxic environment and start placing yourself in a healing one. This doesn't always mean moving houses or changing jobs. It means being intentional about the microenvironments you create. It means recognizing that the lighting in your room, the people you allow into your inner circle, and the amount of visual noise you tolerate are all spiritual decisions. They're the climate of your soul. When we look at the life of the prophets, they were often called away. Elijah was called to a cave. Moses was called to a mountain. John the Baptist was called to the wilderness. In each case, God didn't just want to speak to them. He wanted to speak to them in a place where the static of the world couldn't interfere with the frequency of heaven. He wanted their nervous systems to settle into the rhythm of the natural world he had created, so their spirits could finally be free to hear him. You might feel like your mind is a chaotic place, but perhaps it's just reflecting the chaos of your surroundings. Perhaps the mental heaviness you feel isn't a lack of faith, but a very natural response to a heavy environment. If you were standing in a room filled with smoke, you wouldn't blame your lungs for struggling to breathe. You would open a window or leave the room. The same is true for your thinking. If your thoughts are smoky, clouded, dark, and difficult, it may be time to look at what is burning in your environment. What is creating the haze? Is it the constant stream of negative news? Is it a relationship that feels like a constant weight? Is it a physical space that you have more agency than you realize? You can begin to curate the climate of your life. You can choose to walk in spaces that remind you of who you are. You can choose to spend time with people whose frequency is one of peace and grace. You can choose to turn off the noise and let the silence of God's creation speak to you. Renewal is not about trying harder. It is about standing in a different place. It is about recognizing that you are a seed, and a seed doesn't try to grow. It simply responds to the soil, the water, and the light. If you find yourself wilting, don't look at the seed. Look at the garden. Look at the climate. And then, with gentleness and grace, begin to move toward the light. This is where the work begins, not in the wrestling with your thoughts, but in the tending of your environment. When you change the where, the how of your thinking begins to change all on its own. Your brain, in its infinite design, will begin to map the new terrain. It will build new roads, roads of peace, roads of clarity, and roads of faith. And soon, you will find that the peace you were so desperately trying to think into existence has simply grown quiet and steady because you finally gave it the right soil to take root. As you move through your day, pay attention to the whispers of your rooms. Listen to what your office is saying to your soul. Listen to what your home is telling your nervous system. You are not a victim of your thoughts. You are a resident of your environment. And as a resident, you have the power to renovate. You have the power to create a garden where your soul can finally flourish. This journey toward clarity is not a sprint. It's a slow migration. It's the process of moving one small step at a time away from the climates of urgency and into the climates of presence. It's the realization that God cares about the where of your life because He cares about the you of your life. He wants you in a place where you can breathe, where you can see, and where you can finally be still and know that He is God. If you're finding value in this perspective and want to continue exploring how to align your life with peace and clarity, I invite you to subscribe. We're building a community here focused on deep, quiet growth that honors both the way we were created and the God who created us. Consider for a moment the social and emotional environments you inhabit. This isn't just about the furniture in your room. It's about the emotional tone of the people around you. We often think of bad company as people who talk us into doing wrong things. But it goes deeper than that. It's about the unspoken expectations and the chronic stress signals we pick up from others. If you're surrounded by people who are constantly in a state of fight or flight, your own nervous system will begin to co-regulate with theirs. You'll find yourself feeling rushed when there is no need to hurry, or defensive when there is no threat. We are mirrors to one another. If you spend your time in an environment where the normal state is one of judgment, comparison, or exhaustion, your soul will begin to wear that like a heavy coat. You might not even realize it's there until you step into a different environment and feel the sudden, jarring lightness of being around people who are at peace. This is why the biblical warning that bad company corrupts good character is so profound. It's not just a moral warning. It's a biological reality. Your character, your very way of being in the world, is being shaped by the emotional climate of your tribe. As you reflect on this, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. What kind of environment do you feel most shapes your thoughts right now? Is it a physical space, a workplace, or perhaps a digital environment that feels like it's pulling you in a certain direction? Identifying it is the first step toward change. The transition toward clarity doesn't require a radical, overnight upheaval of your entire life. It begins with awareness. It begins by looking around your room, your home, or your office and asking, what is this space telling me about who I am? If your environment is telling you that you're behind, that you are messy, or that you're in danger, you don't need to try harder. You need to shift the signal. Maybe it's as simple as creating one small corner of peace in your home, a place where the phone isn't allowed, where there is order, and where you can sit and simply be in the presence of God. It's about choosing alignment over control. You cannot control every environment you enter, but you can be intentional about the ones you return to for rest. You can begin to make small shifts that tell your brain, it is safe here. You can put down your armor now. You are not broken. You are not a failure for feeling overwhelmed or stuck. You are a living, breathing being that is responding exactly the way you were designed to respond to the world around you. If a plant is wilting, we don't scream at the plant to try harder. We check the light, we check the water, and we check the soil. We change the environment so the plant can do what it was born to do. God works through placement, not just through pressure. He is the great gardener, and often his way of renewing your mind is to gently lead you to still waters and green pastures. He knows that renewal begins by changing where you stand. When you change your surroundings, you give your soul the room it needs to breathe, to heal, and to finally hear the whisper of the Spirit over the noise of the world. Take heart. Peace is not something you have to manufacture. It is something you enter into. As you look at your life this week, remember that you have the permission to curate your space, to protect your peace, and to move toward environments that reflect the person God is calling you to be. If you know someone who feels stuck or overwhelmed right now, someone who is blaming themselves for a heaviness they can't escape, please share this with them. It might be the very revelation they need to finally stop fighting themselves and start finding their way to a place where they can truly grow. This is why change feels so hard for many of us. We have been taught that the mind is a muscle that must be disciplined into submission, yet we ignore the very arena in which that muscle has to perform. We try to use willpower to overcome a physical environment that is screaming at our nervous system to stay the same. If you're trying to find peace while your phone is buzzing with notifications, your desk is buried under papers, and your house is in a state of constant, low-grade chaos, you are asking your brain to perform a miracle. You are asking it to ignore its primary job, which is to respond to the world around it. Your brain is not a closed circuit. It is an open system, constantly exchanging information with everything you see, touch, and breathe. When you walk into a space of disorder, your willpower is a finite resource, like a battery that drains throughout the day. If you spend 90% of your battery just trying to ignore the chaos of your environment, you have nothing left for the internal work of prayer, reflection, or emotional regulation. You're not weak. You're simply drained by the very air you're breathing. If you're finding value in this perspective and want to continue exploring how to align your life with peace and clarity, I invite you to subscribe. We're building a community here focused on deep, quiet growth that honors both the way we were created and the God who created us. Consider for a moment the social and emotional environments you inhabit. This isn't just about the furniture in your room. It's about the emotional tone of the people around you. We often think of bad company as people who talk us into doing wrong things. But it goes deeper than that. It's about the unspoken expectations and the chronic stress signals we pick up from others. If you're surrounded by people who are constantly in a state of fight or flight, your own nervous system will begin to co-regulate with theirs. This is a phenomenon deeply rooted in our biology. We have what are often called mirror neurons, cells in the brain that fire both when we perform an action and when we observe someone else performing it. When you are in the presence of someone who is perpetually anxious, your brain literally mimics the neural state of anxiety. You catch their stress as if it were a physical contagion. You will find yourself feeling rushed when there is no need to hurry, or defensive when there is no threat. This emotional atmosphere becomes the water you swim in. If the water is toxic, the fish cannot stay healthy, no matter how much it wants to be well. We are mirrors to one another. If you spend your time in an environment where the normal state is one of judgment, comparison, or exhaustion, your soul will begin to wear that like a heavy coat. You might not even realize it's there. You might think the weight you feel is just the weight of being alive. You might think the cynicism in your heart is just realism, but it is often just the residue of the emotional climate you inhabit. You won't realize how much this has shaped you until you step into a different environment and feel the sudden, jarring lightness of being around people who are at peace. This is why the biblical warning that bad company corrupts good character is so profound. It's not just a moral warning, it's a biological reality. Your character, your very way of being in the world, this constant noise floor keeps the brain in a state of low-level vigilance. It is hearing everything, even if you aren't listening. When you intentionally seek out true silence, or the natural sounds of wind and water, your brain experiences a profound relief. It is like a person who has been shouting to be heard finally being allowed to whisper. You're not broken. You're not a failure for feeling overwhelmed or stuck. You are a living, breathing being that is responding exactly the way you were designed to respond to the world around you. If a plant is wilting, we don't scream at the plant to try harder. We check the light, we check the water, and we check the soil. We change the environment so the plant can do what it was born to do. Why do we treat ourselves with less compassion than we treat a common houseplant? We demand fruit from our lives while ignoring the fact that our roots are in dry, compacted soil. God works through placement, not just through pressure. We often imagine God as a demanding taskmaster, standing over us with a stopwatch, waiting for us to get it together. But the scripture presents him as the great gardener. A gardener doesn't make a plant grow. A gardener cannot force a leaf to unfurl or a flower to bloom. What a gardener does is provide the conditions. They clear the weeds, they enrich the soil, and they ensure the placement is right for the specific needs of that plant. Often, God's way of renewing your mind is to gently lead you to still waters and green pastures. He knows that renewal begins by changing where you stand. When you change your surroundings, you give your soul the room it needs to breathe, to heal, and to finally hear the whisper of the Spirit over the noise of the world. In the story of Elijah, when he was exhausted and ready to give up, God didn't give him a lecture on faith. He gave him food, sleep, and a journey to a mountain. He changed Elijah's environment before he changed Elijah's perspective. Take heart. Peace is not something you have to manufacture. It is something you enter into. It is a gift that is already present, waiting for you to find the space where it can be heard. As you look at your life this week, remember that you have the permission to curate your space, to protect your peace, and to move toward environments that reflect the person God is calling you to be. You are the steward of your surroundings. You have the authority to decide what is allowed to occupy your visual field, your emotional space, and your physical home. When we realize that our environment is the silent narrator of our lives, we stop fighting the symptoms and start looking at the source. We stop wondering why we feel anxious and start noticing the 3 different screens that are constantly vying for our attention. We stop wondering why we feel lonely and start noticing that our physical spaces are designed for isolation rather than connection. We stop wondering why we feel spiritually dry and start noticing that we haven't stood in the rain of God's natural creation in weeks. The brain is a marvelous, adaptive instrument. It wants to give you what you need to survive in the world you've given it. If you give it a world of chaos, it will give you the gift of anxiety to help you navigate that chaos. If you give it a world of peace, it will give you the gift of clarity to help you enjoy that peace. The choice is not just a mental one, it is a physical one. It is a placement of the body that leads to a renewal of the mind. As you begin to make these shifts, you will find that faith feels less like an uphill climb and more like a downhill flow. You will find that patience is easier when your environment isn't constantly rushing you. You will find that joy is more accessible when your eyes are resting on things that are true, noble, and beautiful. This is the promise of a life aligned with the way we were designed. If you know someone who feels stuck or overwhelmed right now, someone who is blaming themselves for a heaviness they can't escape, please share this with them. It might be the very revelation they need to finally stop fighting themselves and start finding their way to a place where they can truly grow. Would you like me to dive deeper into how specific colors and textures in your home affect your brain's ability to rest, Or perhaps explore the digital environment and how to curate your phone to serve your peace instead of stealing it.